how can landlords protect themselves?
The real problem for residential landlords, investors, is they don't know the law. Name me a business where the customer knows the law better than the business owner.
The landlording business.
Landlord-tenant. Absolutely. I mean, an investor thinks
But
it's
that's why there's so
completely
much abuse by the tenant.
Absolutely.
Because they take the time to look at it. The landlord does not take it for
Why
granted.
is that?
Right.
I don't know.
Hey, thanks for being in the REC experience. Today is season 3, episode 14, and we were so excited to finally get into our studios, Mr. Harry Fine. What's going on?
I'm good. Hello.
Okay, what's up?
He was a tough man to get.
He was. He's been so busy. He was an adjudicator at the Landlord-Tenant Board for years, and now runs his own paralegal business and paralegal service, really specializing in the whole Residential Tenancy Act. And so for any of our viewers and or listeners who are thinking about getting into the landlording business, because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
You need to get educated.
Well, you need to take it seriously. Like you said, look at it like it's a business, because if you don't, you're going to find yourself coming across a lot of surprises. Quite frankly, we're in the industry, and just listening to you guys talk, I was surprised on a few of the points that he made. And really, a lot of these problems can be negated right from the get-go just by talking to him or someone like him, or educating yourself, reading, picking up the appropriate materials.
And it's unfortunate, right? Most people, as Harry made mention to it too, most people get in touch with him when they need him to go to the board.
Yeah, it's like a little too late.
It just get in touch with him at the start. And some of his materials and his webinars, it's like at a cost of like $250, $300
It's going to save you so much.
Thousands of dollars and headache. Right,
and timing can be what we've learned today. I think is the timing can be such an issue for landlords looking to make any type of move with their tenant.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're not waiting until the 11th hour, because that might make you have to wait months and months and months versus getting something done right off the start.
Because the forms need to be sent at certain times.
Yeah, you have 24 hours to send certain forms. So don't wait until it's the 23rd hour.
Tons of education and value in this episode, guys. Laura, thank you for joining us.
Of course.
Guys, as I said, that you're in the REC experience. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify and iTunes. Subscribe, because I know a lot of you are listening. The feedback is amazing that we get on a daily basis.
It has been, yes.
Right? And so please subscribe and leave comments. Feedback means the world to us. As always, thank you for the support, and can't wait to meet you in person. Take care, guys.
Bye.
REC Experience presents Real Estate, Entrepreneurship, Leadership with your host, Jazz Takhar. The REC Experience podcast is now on air.
So excited today to be sitting with Mr. Harry Fine and my business partner, Simeon Papailias. How are you doing today, Simeon?
I'm doing very well. Good morning, my beautiful friend, and good morning, Harry.
And nice to meet you guys. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much for coming to our studio today. I know how busy you are in your business. For our listeners that have not Googled you or seen any of your webinars or read any of your articles, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, Harry.
I have a funny background. You never know where you're going to be in 10 years, 20 years. Who was it? Julian Lennon said, "Life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans." That was the song. I'm not sure if he wrote it. But that's certainly true with me. I was in a family business. We owned and ran Bowlerama, a chain of, at our peak, 24 bowling centers across southern Ontario. In Toronto and
I've bowled there
Barrie,
tons
Brantford,
of times.
Chatham, Guelph, Kitchener, London, Peterborough, Stony Creek, Woodstock. And we sold it in 2000. There was a terrible decline in the business starting in 1980. So we got out while we could still get out. And interestingly, most of those places we had now, they don't even exist anymore. Land values have killed the bowling business in the GTA. And I had a friend who was involved in the government. He was actually the Attorney General at the time. He said, "Harry, you'd be a great adjudicator at one of the province's boards, commissions, agencies, or tribunal." And I knew nothing about administrative law and agencies, boards, commissions, but he told me a bit, and I became a member. I studied. I became a member of the Landlord Tenant Board. In those days, it was called the Ontario Rental Housing Tribunal, but it's the same organization. It's just changed names. And I was an adjudicator there for my term because those positions are term limited. And I loved it. I really loved every day of it. I was seen as a down-the-middle type of guy, not favoring landlords, not favoring tenants, understood the law, wasn't getting overturned on appeals and stuff. But they're term limited. So as my term was up and the government was changing to the wonderful McGuinty years, in 2003, I think he won the election, and then we had 15 years of hell in Ontario. I'm sorry, this isn't supposed to be political.
It's all good.
And,
no worries.
So
I think a lot of people would be just fine with a commentary on Dalton.
And
so
followed
everyone's
by-
nodding
followed by
their heads
Kathleen
when they're
Wynne.
listening. Yeah, okay.
and they've made it, as you know, terrible for landlord investors. But I left and I thought, what am I going to do for the next phase of my life? And I had the benefit of the government training me in landlord tenant law, making me an expert. And people were saying to me, Harry, you should become a paralegal. And at the time, paralegals were just becoming licensed in Ontario. Paralegals, you used to be able to just put up a shingle that said, I'm a paralegal.
Okay.
Like today, you can say, I'm a sex therapist. I
Right.
mean, there's no accreditation.
No regulation on it. Yeah.
And but in 2007, that was starting, and I got in at the right time, and I got licensed, and I was grandfathered. I didn't have to go and take the education portion because I had been an adjudicator at the board. I had then practiced for a couple of years before regulation came, so I was grandfathered, and I was loving and am loving my time as a paralegal. So I had no idea I was going to be here. If you had told me 20 years ago, you know.
We talk about that all the time. In terms of the Landlord Tenant Board, why do people go there? Because I know there's a lot of listeners and viewers that have, they kind of know that they've heard of the LTB, but
from a landlord's perspective, they go there because they have to.
Right.
I mean, from everybody's perspective, you have to. If you can't work out the problem, the Landlord Tenant Board in law is one of the hundreds of agencies, boards, commissions, and tribunals in the province, and they have exclusive jurisdiction over residential landlord tenant law. So if you're my tenant and I'm fighting with you or you're fighting with me, we can either go in the street or we
Old
can't,
school,
we
Western
can't, we
style,
can't
I
go to
love
small
it.
claims court because
Right.
small claims court has no jurisdiction except for after the tenancy for collection of arrears.
That's right.
And so we go to the Landlord Tenant Board. And when it started in 1998, it was fairly balanced. It was new. And when I was there starting in 2001, it was still a pretty decent place. People got to hearings fairly quickly. Rent arrears, 2-3 weeks. Conduct issues, 3-4 weeks. The adjudicators were somewhat down the middle. But over 21 years, it's become perverse. I was going to say perverted, but I mean perverse is a better word.
Right.
It's the law has changed.
I like this.
The law has changed incrementally.
Because it's sickening.
Yeah,
It is sickening.
it is a sickening place. The law has changed in steps, and it's a very political piece of legislation. There are more tenants than landlords. So particularly after, in 2003, the McGuinty and then after McGuinty Wynne governments kept making incremental changes to it, all worse for landlords. And landlord tenant law is complicated. It's crazy complicated. It is not logical. You can't use your common sense, even good business sense, to know what's going to happen. It's been changed to and tweaked. It's sort of like a piece of software that was written in COBOL in 1970.
Sure.
Like it's a piece of legacy software. They keep adding on to it
Right.
with bad
Patching.
ideas.
Patching and
it
Band-Aid
with
effect,
bad
right?
ideas.
Yeah.
Service Pack 146, and they're all bad, and they all hurt landlords.
I want to mention something that you said. So in 2003, the McGuinty government and then the Wynne government. And I'm not making this political at all. I find the things that have happened that have made this so perverse and sickening is when it became political and they saw an opportunity to seize votes using the legislation is when things turn out for the worse. So if any single person can legitimately tell me that the law protecting tenants is actually protecting tenants, if you can say that with a straight face in my eyes and bring a backup as to how that happened, I will bet, forget the $1 million, I'll bet you a coffee. I'll bet you a coffee that there's nothing you can tell me from a tenant perspective, because as we know where rentals are today. This is as a piece of legislation, which was the Fair Ontario Housing Plan.
Well, rent control
Correct.
has hurt tenants, no question.
So the things that are meant to protect them, that are complete deception tactics and political vote magnets, is the result of the perversion, the complete meltdown of the system.
Yeah, some people have said, and I believe it's true, that other than bombing a city, rent control is the next best way to destroy a city.
Right.
And
Well, we're
there's
seeing
proof-
it now,
and there's
right?
proof
We
in
have a supply
dozens.
problem.
Yeah.
So go to any urban setting, Chicago, anywhere where they have tried this before, in Europe, in Asia. This isn't rocket science. This isn't somebody reinventing the wheel. Rent control is a very sticky word. A lot of people have tried it. It has failed everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
It is protecting existing tenants in Ontario
right.
who can never move. They're locked into their home.
But that's not reality, is it?
It's not. I mean, people, things change. People move, and they can't. And for landlords, they got a problem. If I have an existing tenant who wants to stay, and I see in my condo where I'm getting $2,300 a month, and there's an identical condo in that building, and new tenants are paying $3,100 a month, what do? I can't sell it to another investor because that tenant's only paying $2,300 a month.
Sure.
No investor's going to buy it.
The numbers are not going to make sense.
It's a crazy thing.
And are you going to fix it and service it the way you would your condo for $3,000?
Well, I can't. I mean, my condo fees are going up 5% a year.
Uh-huh.
There might be a special assessment depending on the building.
And we have a 1.8% increase in rent.
Not only 1.8. In the worst of all the changes over the years came in 2017, when the election was coming for Wynne. And Wynne knew the numbers were terrible. So she started offering free dental care, free drugs for people under 25. She was offering the world. She changed the rules about rent control. She took away some exemptions to newer buildings. She changed the rules when a landlord wants to get their property back for themselves or for a purchaser. Sure. If you were in a condo before as an owner and your utilities, if you were paying utilities and they went up 20%, there was at least a mechanism. You could go to the landlord tenant board with an application for an order for an above guideline increase, for an exception. And she took it away. And when people said, well, how can you do that? What if a landlord's only getting 1.8% guideline, but utilities have gone up 25%, thanks to the Liberals? How can you do that? She said, and I swear to you, she said, the landlord should be careful to get energy-efficient appliances. Well, what if they already had energy-efficient appliances? Yeah. It was
but who are
purely
you
political.
to dictate to somebody what to do?
Yeah.
Like, it breaks the spirit of everything the political system is meant to do.
Well, we don't have free contract in landlord-tenant law.
And we were talking off air saying that they're just Band-Aid effects, right? They're not really addressing the supply issue. It's doing little Band-Aid effects on the demand side of things, but they're not really touching the supply
this
issue.
week,
I
Toronto
would love
City
for you to
Council.
expand on that.
Yeah.
Toronto City Council this week is talking about new rules for secondary suites in homes, and good for them. Finally.
Yeah.
But what about rooming houses? The
Yeah.
whole NIMBY thing. We got a lot of people who can only pay a little rent. They need an affordable option for housing. Some parts of the old some parts of the megacity allow rooming houses. The bylaw was never integrated. Rooming houses would be a wonderful way to allow investors to make money and people to have low rents. But there's this stigma. There's not in my backyard.
So Harry, just because you're mentioning co-housing, rooming housing, there is a new term for it. It is actually brewing a tremendous amount of attention. It's already happening in the U.S. Mm-hmm. We were speaking to our good friends Darcy McGovney
at Greybrook Realty.
At Greybrook Realty Partners, which is a huge financier of developments and getting into development, etc. But they're going to be presenting over the next few months at a lot of their presentations the revolution that is co-housing. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be pushing and lobbying with a lot of their friends, all very powerful people, to make actual livable conditions for people in the new reality where when land in Toronto is selling for $2,000 per buildable square foot, when you buy land.
We need density. We need laneway housing. I just got back from 3 weeks in Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and I've traveled through China and Japan and you see density high-rises for as far as the eye can see. Here we're so afraid of density, yet we want to be one of the great cities of the world, and we want to have Google bring 5,000 people.
Where are they going to go?
Where are they going to go?
Well, we always say we got 145,000 people coming into the GTA.
But where are they going to go, Jazz, without
Right.
pushing the rest to 5,000 a month? And now we're crying we can't afford it. The solution to it is common areas. Nobody said it has to be a Soviet Union block housing. It can be done right.
Yep.
It can be done in 2019 in Toronto with all the amenities in the world to make your life great, but you're paying for a portion. The landlord does not suffer because he's actually making more money off retailing the rooms, like a student housing model.
Yep.
Everybody wins.
Landlords are an easy
And
target.
it's going to be very, very affordable.
Everybody wins.
In terms of what you just said here, you landlords
Except there are more tenants than landlords. So the administration, even conservative administrations, want to be careful about losing all the tenant votes. For sure. It's a difficult problem. And, when you start traveling the world and you see where things work, particularly if you travel throughout Asia, you see strong man, strong woman leaders, one-party governments. People complain about China. I love the Chinese governance model because if you got 1.5 billion people, you got to have a government who, like a strong mayor system, that can say this is what we're going to do. But here we pander to everybody, and we worry about offending anybody, and what we get is compromise that benefits nobody, not landlords, not tenants. Tenants are suffering. I feel for young people, young couple, both working for a bank, can't afford a condo. That's crazy. And it's because of government is just being political rather than public policy.
So now working within the policies and the rules and the regulations, how can landlords protect themselves?
People say landlord-tenant law is so unfair. The Residential Tenancies Act, which is the law, is so unfair. And it is. And I've written position papers and suggestions to government about leveling the playing field. But there are two problems. And I'm not making this stuff up. One of the problems is the RTA is unbalanced. But the real problem for residential landlords, investors, is they don't know the law. Name me a business where the customer knows the law better than the business owner.
The landlording business.
Absolutely. An investor thinks
So that's why there's so much
passive.
abuse by the tenants.
Absolutely.
Because they take the time to look at it. The landlord does not take it for
Why
granted.
is that?
Right.
I don't know. And
Well, I think it's just a lack of education, right? The
why
landlords,
haven't-
they don't even know where to go
do you
to
know how to
get
answer
it.
the question is why a landlord would not take the time to educate themselves? The answer is no. And I think that's the void that we are trying to fill right now.
There's a fear of missing out, particularly in the GTA. Everybody wants to get
FOMO.
in.
FOMO.
Absolutely. But they're not learning. I have sort of dedicated this third or fourth part of my career to trying to do more education. I don't want people to come to me to hire me when they're getting sued at the LTB. Yes. I want people to come to me. The smartest thing a new landlord can do, brand new landlord.
Okay.
Young couple decide, we're going to go buy a property, whether it's a triplex, whatever it is. They should call me, have an hour appointment, spend $175 plus HST for an hour to find out the things they need to know. What I did a couple of years ago, because I found it was, and I was getting a lot of those, I found it was too difficult to reach enough people.
Yep.
I started doing online webinars. If you go to my site, hfineparalegal.ca, you'll see a big green button that says webinars.
Okay.
If every residential landlord, before or when they're becoming a residential landlord, got my new Landlord 3-pack, they would stay out of trouble. They would understand rent control. I'm going to give you an example of rent control. They would understand how to start the tenancy, dangers with the Human Rights Code, how to find the right tenant, understanding rules about entry and maintenance and all sorts of issues.
Yeah.
Let's talk about rent control. So I believe, and I swear to you, I believe that in 80% of the small landlord tenancies, not the high rises, when landlords raise the rent, they're not serving the tenant with an N1 notice of rent increase. They might be sending them an email and they think, I'm only going up the 1.8%.
Or
That's the
texting
guideline.
it, saying-
Texting it.
Yeah.
Or they even, for some reason, they sign a new lease every year, which is not required. And in the lease, they have the 1.8%. So they say, the tenant agreed and signed it. All those rent increases are illegal. So let's say you moved into my condo and you were paying $2,200 in 2016.
Yes.
By 2024, you're paying, instead of $2,200, $2,800. Well, the legal rent is actually $2,200, not $2,800, because in the first year you didn't give an N1. Even if you gave one every subsequent year, the rent's illegal. So
I'm just saying I didn't know that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we go to the landlord tenant
Thank
board.
you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to evict you because you haven't paid your rent.
Oh my God.
The tenant says in year one, the landlord sent me this note that my rent was going up 1.8%. You've been overcharging now in current year, $600 a month, $7,200 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Going back, you owe a little less to the tenant in year N-1, -2, et cetera. You owe the tenant like $25,000. First of all, you won't evict the tenant on the rent arrears application, but now the tenant will sue you for all that money. It's so easy to raise the rent. A child could do it if they looked at my documentation on my one webinar, I sell as a single, rent control. It's so easy a child could do it, but you have to do it right. Not because it's the right thing to do or the moral thing to do. Landlord tenanting in Ontario has nothing to do with what's right or fair. We have a highly regulated system, and adjudicators at the board don't have the luxury of saying, well, you meant well, I'm going to give you that eviction. Because if the adjudicator, even if they try to do the right thing when the landlord's messed up, it'll get overturned on review or appeal. So there's no point. You have to keep your hands clean.
And will the tenant ever let up if they were able to sniff blood?
No.
They are gonna go for it all day long.
You know, too many tenants just dislike their landlords.
And it's just abusive process.
And there's a toxic online community. I mean, if you go to, Buns, for instance, Buns.
I know Buns, the marketplace.
It's about the worst in terms of landlord-tenant relationships. I mean, in the Cultural Revolution in China, they wanted to kill the landlord class. Not much different than the people who frequent Buns. I mean, it's toxic the way that the government, through their legislation, have created this push and pull that's turned into hatred. If it just was fair, if everybody, if you don't pay your car lease, you lose your car.
Yeah.
If you don't pay your groceries, you don't get your groceries. You got to pay your insurance. You got to pay for your clothing. You got to pay for everything. Oh, but what can I not pay for 6 months, for 8 months? My rent. There's even posts on Buns about how to not pay your rent for 8 months, and it's
get
legal.
away with it.
So,
could this be the time that I bring you a live case study?
sure.
I would really.
Is this your own issue?
No.
Because I need you to sign a retainer agreement.
It is an example. 6 months of arrears of no payment. This citizen of our city has a child. I personally have a big heart. I work with a person. I reason with a person. I try everything in my power legitimately.
Okay, but no good deed you do will go unpunished in the landlord-tenant world. You're just a sucker.
Correct. So let me be the sucker for a second. And this is where the abuse comes in. And I actually do want your input on this for real, because it is live and direct. Okay? So for 6 months, I let it go. I say, it's a 6 month. This is now a year and a half ongoing, by the way. So we're talking about the first 6 months. I let it go. Please, let's reason. This can't go on.
So did she pay after the first 6 months?
How do we get to a year and a half?
Yeah.
Special circumstances, because it's a year and a half now. Okay. So the first 6 months, the property was running amok due to many different reasons. I start finding solutions to the entire property. I rang control. I got hired on as a property management for this Aplex.
For the building. Yeah.
For the Aplex. So I'm fixing units. I'm getting everything wrangled up. Time is passing. I sit down and I say, citizen of Toronto, may you please respect me. Respect me. I respect you. I've given you everything. I have a board of owners to report to. I feel for you. I get it. You owe $10,000 today. You're going to pay your rent ongoing, and you're going to give me $500 a month for the rest. Me having some experience in real estate and being to the board before and going through the process, I wasn't going to get much more given her circumstances.
That's probably the order you'd get at the board.
Correct.
Yep.
So me being experienced, me being kind, me being everything, I do this deal. She pays the rent. The $500 arrangement bounces. She pays the rent. It bounces. The $500 goes through. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. Now we're at almost a year. Send an email. Put notices up. We're going to go through this. Put on an N1. You owe $1,500 for rent, $8,000 for back end.
N4.
She goes, waits, of course, the full time of the notice, 28 days or 14, whatever it was at the
14
time,
days, yeah.
14 days. Boom, makes a payment of $3,000, shoves it out the window now, right? Now we got to start all over.
But she hasn't paid everything.
We'll get there. She does this 2-3 times. Every month now I'm serving her a notice. Every month she goes and shakes it down, dumps it. I say enough is enough. This can't happen. I speak to one of your colleagues in the business. I'm like, what am I doing here? He goes, you cannot forget the money. Are you ready to write off the money? I said, yes, I am. You want her out? I said, I have to have her out. I can't go on like this.
Right.
So now I served the notice with saying, you're not paying me on time over a record of this long.
The N8 persistent late payment notice.
Persistent late payment notice. So now I have to write off the money.
Yeah.
I had to make a choice, and I'm going through this process now.
Well, you didn't do it right. I mean, the first thing you got to know
I've
is
done a lot of things wrong.
If rent
being
isn't-
kind is being wrong
that's
in
right.
this business.
If rent
just
isn't
before we
paid
go on-
the first day of the month,
Just
you
before we
serve
go on
an
here,
N4 on the second day.
I want you to take that case study, because I think this is going to be fantastic for the listeners and the viewers. What could have and what should have Simeon done from the start?
The tenant signed a lease that they're going to pay on the first day of the month. On the second day of the month, you serve an N4. You serve it nicely. Yeah, I mean, you tell the tenant that, look, I'm not evicting you. This N4 just starts the process. You still have 14 days to pay, but I need to get paid. I have a mortgage. On the 15th day, if you haven't paid, I'm going to go to the landlord-tenant board. So on the 15th day, if they haven't paid, you should go to the landlord-tenant board. And then still say, you know what, I'm not evicting you. If you pay everything, including my application fee before you go to the hearing, it all goes away, including any new rent that's come due. And then at the hearing, after the hearing, I get my eviction order. I still say, hey, buddy, you're a good tenant except for the rent. If you pay this before I file with the sheriff in the 12th day, it all goes away. And he doesn't, and then I file with the sheriff, and I still say, look, what's going on here? I mean, you owe me 6 months' rent now. The sheriff's coming in a few days. If you pay your money, somehow, if you won the lottery and pay your money before the sheriff comes, you can still stay. So when you serve the tenant the first N4, you're not saying you're evicted. You're not saying I want to evict you. You're saying I need to get paid. What landlords need to do is a couple of things. One, keep their hands clean, because if they want to win at the board, they need to have entered the unit properly, raised the rent properly, done a proper lease.
Due process. Follow due.
Right.
You have to
From day
know
one.
the process. Educate.
Continue, Harry. There's a couple other things that you want to mention.
And serve the notice on the first day of the month. If the tenant's late in their rent all the time, yes, if you are a month to month at that point, not in lease term, you can also, at the same time you're giving them the N4 for the rent they owe you, give them an N8 for persistent late payment of rent, which gives you more power at the board. You want to be in a power position. You're not in a power position without knowledge. You need to go to the board with your hands clean, having done the documentation right, and understanding how the LTB works. Every case of tenant conduct, if the conduct is bad enough, you should be able to get an eviction, but you have to do it right. If a tenant owes you rent, you absolutely should get all your rent or get an eviction. One of the problems now is the board is backed up for months. We're short adjudicators. Since the election or before the election, no new adjudicators have been appointed. That's Doug Ford's fault. Adjudicators' terms have expired, so they're gone. We now have at the LTB about 60% of a full complement of adjudicators. I was at a hearing on Monday morning, and it was a rent hearing, a big block of about 65 matters in front of the adjudicator. And a landlord and tenant had gone up in front of the adjudicator, and the landlord said, we're agreeing to her adjournment to come back because she needs to get some documents. So the landlord, for some reason, was consenting to an adjournment when $3,000 was owed. The adjudicator looked at her and said, okay, landlord, you're consenting to an adjournment. Give me your unavailable dates so we can schedule properly for July, August, and September.
Sweet Lord.
So
In March.
in March, the LTB is in crisis mode. It's out of control. It's in the papers occasionally. I've done some CBC stuff on it occasionally. But landlords are easy targets. It's not as if, I remember during the 1990s when the Family Responsibility Office, they called it something different then. It's where a spouse can get money paid directly through the government if there's child support or spousal support. Mm-hmm. And the government was running the system, and it was terrible. And women primarily weren't getting their money, and they couldn't buy groceries. Every day in the provincial legislature, members of the legislature across the province were standing up saying, Minister of, who would it have been, Community and Social Services, where's the money? Look at this woman, she can't buy food. The government revamped the system. They changed it from the to the families, the FSP to the FRO. They added staff. They changed the law. They responded to a crisis, just like this week. The Conservatives responded to the crisis on autism, where they've now changed the rules. Governments respond when people yell and scream. Landlords don't get together as groups. Landlords are, they don't realize they would have power collectively.
Yep.
They don't go to the lawn of Queen's Park. They don't write letters to their MPP. They don't make appointments with their MTP. And I have to blame some parts of the real estate industry that have caused the government to not take a good look. I have been very vocal blaming AREA and to some extent TREB, because they're so big, because it's always about other issues. I mean, so many realtors like yourselves are dealing with investors, but it's always about land transfer tax, land transfer tax. If I hear that one more time, what about the fact that landlords, can't even give notices of entry without making 2 trips to the house when they're 80 miles from where they live to give a notice to come in Saturday to change a furnace filter? What about the fact that the law is so crazy that you could end up owing your tenant thousands of dollars because you were 1 day short serving an N1 notice? There are so many issues, and all AREA is talking about is land transfer tax. And then and a lot of my clients are realtor referrals, and the real estate industry is not helping them.
Well, even with the new lease agreement that came into place.
Well, the government lease agreement, frankly, came about because the AREA Form 400 was so bad.
Well, I want to talk about the lease agreement because now we're 1 year almost. Next week, in a couple of weeks.
That's right.
What's some things that you've seen that
the
that
government,
our landlords need to know about, right?
The government lease agreement created, as of April 30th last year, a mandatory lease that all landlords have to get the tenant to sign.
So no more writing agreements on napkins. And
frankly, the Form 400 that realtors use, I predict in a few years it won't exist anymore. Why should I have this agreement, which has everything in it, just so I can transfer it to this agreement that has everything in it?
I have a feeling some people think that you can write outside the law.
No, you can't. And that's why the government created this.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, we had so many leases.
I truly actually like it. I like
it's an okay thing. Yeah. We had so many leases that said the tenant shall not allow more than one person to live with them. The tenant shall pay the first $100 of appliance repair. The tenant shall not have pets. The tenant shall allow the landlord in to do inspections with 12 hours notice. There were so many illegal clauses in leases. The government said, let's make sure everybody understands the rules.
Yes.
And they created a lease that everybody had to sign. The problem is when they tried to make a lease that was all things to all people, they ended up creating a lease that was nothing for everybody.
Yeah.
So the lease is a skeleton, which is why either if you purchase my forms pack or you get the new Landlord 3-pack of webinars, one of the documents you'll get is the Ontario's greatest lease appendix, which you as realtors call schedules, which you attach to the government lease, which is permissible, which sets out every type of situation or potential dispute that a landlord and tenant could have. And people that purchase my forms package and use the lease addendum.
What's the cost of the forms package for somebody?
If you buy the forms package, it's 29 different documents, but the highlight certainly is the lease appendix, and it costs $99.95 or something. But for a new landlord, and I swear to you, this is true. I'm on a lot of landlord Facebook groups. In one this morning, it was like, I just love this morning. I wake up and I see a post on a Facebook group that says, I'm a brand new landlord. We're just getting into this, and I really want to do it right. What do I do? I'll show it to you afterwards because you're not going to believe this. And right away, I'm sitting there typing. I'm having my yogurt. And my wife says, Harry, stop typing. I said, I'm making a sale. and I said to her, and I gave her the link, and I said, look at my new Landlord 3-pack.
Yes.
You get starting a tenancy, rights and obligations, rent control, which would be $99 plus $99 plus $99, like $300.
Yeah.
It's $249. And you get all the forms that you would get in the forms package, plus 6 hours of video.
Right.
Which is accurate, comprehensive.
I think that might be a wise investment.
Yes, absolutely.
Many of the
this
people
is what people forget is that when you're getting into becoming a landlord, you gotta look at it like a business.
It is a business,
right? And so a $249 investment into into the business is not a lot of money. And to educate yourself and get started,
Losing a single month's rent
is going to cost
good friend
you
is thousands.
It's cost you thousands upon thousands.
Forget a month's rent. What if somebody is selling their place and they're using the N12 notice and they've offered vacant possession on closing to the buyer, and they have really no ability to offer vacant possession. The deal doesn't close. The buyer walks away. The buyer sues the seller. I see it every day. I get a call from a realtor or from a landlord saying, my tenant told me they're not leaving, but I promised the buyer they're leaving. What do I do? I wish people would. I have one of my 8 or 9 now, because I did one on cannabis in rentals, but one of my 9 webinars is no-fault evictions, which means the evictions for landlord's use, purchaser's use, demolition, conversion, change of use. In other words, the ones where the tenant's done nothing wrong, but I'm selling my unit and the purchaser's moving in, or I'm going to have my son move in. $99. Instead of getting sued and having $10,000 in legal costs, forget about the judgment, just the legal costs. And people don't want to do it. I don't get it. I mean, there's nobody who knows residential landlord-tenant law in Ontario better than me.
That's why we have you here.
And I teach it well. I taught at Humber.
And thank you for being here.
I want to go back to not scaring anyone from investing into real estate because you have to deal with tenants. It's still a very lucrative business.
I love the investment.
If done right.
That's right.
If done right.
I said before, there's 2 problems, the law and the lack of knowledge.
Yes.
If the lack of knowledge could be remedied, you'd be great, because you'd have the same or more power position than your tenant.
I was reading an article you wrote, and it was news to me, the difference between term and tenancy.
Oh my gosh.
I need you to really elaborate this for our viewers and our listeners.
That's a great point.
Let me say it in 2 words.
Yes.
Term sucks.
Okay.
For landlords, that's 4 words. People don't understand term, and they confuse term with tenancy. When a tenant has lease term, and the word term is confusing, people think of term the way you might think of it in a commercial lease. They think of term meaning the way term worked in an old common law sense. But the RTA creates a new common law, in effect, for landlords and tenants. All that term means is that you can't evict your tenants for any of the no-faults, landlord's use, purchaser's use, etc., or even persistent late payment of rent, if they're in lease term. Now, landlords said, but term, the tenant has to pay the whole 12 months. No, they don't. You can almost never get money from unsatisfied lease term. If a tenant says, I'm going, find the new tenant. Don't worry about it, because you'll never get that money. Now, speaking of AREA again, my friend AREA, you end up with these AREA clauses that say something like, the tenant, if not in default hereunder, may give notice to the landlord, 60 days notice of their desire to extend term for an additional year. So what does that do? A smart tenant who never wants to move out, they're paying their rent, etc. Every year, they give their 60 days notice in writing, renews term. 3 years later, the landlord says, well, I want my son to move in because he's going to U of T, and this is a great place, and it's right near U of T. He goes to the landlord-tenant board and loses because he's in term. So when can I sell it to a purchaser? Or when can I? Never. Because using this AREA clause, the tenant is in perpetual term.
Whereas in a commercial lease,
a term means something.
No, because
term
one second, Simeon.
It's 5 years, 5 years, whatever.
Simeon, before you go there, I want to make sure that our listeners and our viewers get the answer in terms. So what's the difference with tenancy now? How's that?
Well, tenancy just means the entire time they're there. And because a lot of small investors and a lot of realtors misunderstand term, when 12 months of payment are given up front, first and last and 10 other months, they think that the 12th payment, called last month's rent, gets applied to the last month of the term, the year. It doesn't. The 12th month stays in your pocket forever. Interest is paid annually. And 7 years later, when the tenant says, I'm moving out, you take that out of your pocket and apply it to the last month.
So would you never set it up as a term then?
A lot of tenants want term because at least tenants may want 3 years term.
I get that.
They want to be in that position.
So from a landlord's perspective, am I okay to
1
do
year,
a 1 year term?
1 year,
Got it.
but no such thing as renewal. All AREA had to do in that clause, I wouldn't use the clause at all, but all they had to do was say, and all terms and conditions to be the same, save for rent.
Save and accept.
Save and accept for rent, and there shall be no further rights of renewal. These are lawyers working for AREA who wrote this stuff.
It makes no sense.
But your local lawyer who does your real estate transactions does not know landlord-tenant law, generally.
Well, because they're
not what they
dealing
do.
more of a general macro
I
level
don't know
of real
family
estate.
law.
I don't blame them. I think it's fantastic that there's someone like yourself and your colleagues because you hone in and you're an expert
There are
on
lots
the
of
RTA,
people
right?
almost like me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like me. Sorry.
But do you not find that exploitation of a single clause like that can cause a perpetual tenancy, and you have no control of your own property?
Ever.
And this still exists. He is not the only person to. I've heard of this before.
Yeah.
I can assure you that this has been brought to the attention of professionals or government before.
Yeah.
And it still exists.
Talk about still exists. That thing I talked about where if even in the first year you didn't give proper notice of rent increase, that would invalidate your lawful rent throughout the whole tenancy. That's a legislative drafting error that was interpreted incorrectly by the Ontario Court of Appeal. The government's had since 2007 to change it, and they haven't.
So that I didn't know, and just knowing now on top of that they haven't done anything about it is insane.
Crazy. But that's remember 15 years of liberal rule. I suspect when the Doug Ford government gets around to making changes to the RTA, I've been told they're going to fix that.
Let's see how that goes.
I hope they do.
As a pod session, I always like to close this off with a tip for our listeners and our viewers. As our guest today, Mr. Harry Fine, I'm going to start with you.
Well, sure. I mean, know the rules. You're in a highly regulated business. Power comes from knowledge. And there's lots of ways to get that. So landlords, it's not just about the imbalance of the RTA. It's your obligation to recognize this is a business.
Love it. Simeon, on to you. What's your tip?
Like any asset class, if you're investing in mortgages or development portfolios, you need to understand appraisals. You need to make friends and build a power team, a team of experts that are in that field. If you're looking to become a landlord or you are a landlord and the stuff today has either given you shock or you learned something today, you need to learn more. You need to build your toolbox. You need to have an arsenal of people and tools to effectively make profit in your ventures and be a great landlord. By doing the right thing, you are effectively a great landlord.
That's right. Love it.
As opposed to being punished.
My tip to close it off today would be, you guys have heard me say it in other podcasts, especially like when you're thinking about buying or selling, you can get your team together long before you get into trouble. Meaning that when you're buying a home, a lot of people get in touch with the real estate lawyer a week before closing, thinking that it's going to cost them like a criminal lawyer per hour. It's a one-time fee. Get in touch with the lawyer ahead of time. In this situation, get in touch with someone like Harry Fine ahead of schedule. You don't need to call him when you're about to go to the landlord-tenant board.
Or about to serve the N12.
About to serve the
N12.
N12. Let's get in touch with him ahead of time, and so you don't have to cross those paths.
And may I quickly add, Jazz, because our listeners are all over North America, we are in Toronto, Ontario. We are referring to the Residential Tenancies Act of Ontario, which is local to us. Harry is here serving the citizens of Ontario. If you're in Minnesota, if you're in Miami, if you're in British Columbia, there are many amazing, talented people who care. The process is no different for educating yourself. Ask the questions, reach out to the legals, the paralegals, to people who are experts in it.
And it's very important to do it locally.
Absolutely.
Because we've heard stories before, like when people are looking for closing costs, they Googled something, and we had a lady who came to us and thought her closing costs were going to be $2,000, but she didn't know it was for Florida. And closing costs in Toronto were closer to $10,000. So, guys, to my guests today, both Simeon and Harry, thank you so much. And to our listeners and viewers, keep watching. Take care, guys.
This has been the REC Experience Podcast with Jazz Takhar, an REC Canada production.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching the REC Experience. Please make sure to subscribe, like, and share. Click here to watch and experience more videos from REC.